Hello, everyone. Welcome to Finding Deeper Meaning During Times of Uncertainty with Matt Nault. My name is Kara Marsh Proffitt, and I'm the Director of Alumni Operations and Engagement for USD's Office of Alumni Relations. For those of you who don't know me, I am also a proud alumna of the University of San Diego from the class of 2004. All right, before I launch into introducing today's session, I want to extend sincere hopes and prayers to all of you from your friends at USD that you and your loved ones are doing well, safe, healthy, despite the challenges and stressors we have all been facing these last few months. The Alumni Association has pivoted from in-person to digital engagement, if you couldn't tell. It was a dramatic swing for a high-touch operation, and today's program is a result of the desire to continue offering meaningful opportunities for our alumni and friends to connect with one another and with the University of San Diego. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items as it pertains to our Zoom connection today. Your microphones and cameras are muted and deactivated, if you couldn't tell. If you could keep them muted and deactivated for the time being, that would be great. You'll be invited to activate your cameras during the Q&A and discussion portion of today's session a little bit later. And during Q&A, we encourage you to ask questions either through the chat, by raising your hand, or just by simply unmuting yourself and jumping right in and asking. And we do plan to wrap up the official program at 5 p.m. today to be respectful of everyone's time. Without further ado, I am going to introduce our featured speaker, who is Matt Nault. Matt, if you want to activate your camera while I do read your bio so everyone can put a face to a name, that would be awesome. Matt Nault is a native San Diegan, born and raised in Ocean Beach. He attended Saints for high school before moving on to USD to complete his degrees in mass media communications and theology. While at USD, Matt was heavily involved with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. He then went on to receive a master's degree in divinity from Fuller Theological Seminary. He is ordained in the Reformed Church of America, planted and pastored a congregation in San Francisco before moving home to found Renew San Diego with his lovely wife, Florence, and their 3 boys, Benjamin, Levi, and Joshua. In talking with Matt about the concept of this session today, we discussed a lot of topics. The topics of faith and community, of building resilience during times of uncertainty, naming some of the fear that we're experiencing all in our own individual ways, and how to build our connection with one another, which is so incredibly important now more than ever before. Matt talks regularly with his community members about these topics, and I'm thrilled to have him here today to talk with us. Thanks, Matt.
My pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here too, and seeing our friends that are joining us. It's like a little reunion here from college. This is great.
Yeah, we love it. We love it. And
many of you could be featured speakers on this as well, so I can't wait to hear from everybody.
Without a doubt, we'll have to tap everyone later on, huh?
That sounds good. I'm so grateful for my time at USD and for the foundations that it gave me. So to be able to step into a moment like this, where it seems like the world is swirling around us, because it is, and to be able to ask questions like, how do you go through a moment like this, and instead of absorbing all the uncertainty and allowing it to make us more cynical and more bitter and more disconnected and more cut off, to actually be able to go through a season like this and come out the other side more connected, more hopeful, more joyful, more resilient, more buoyant. I think this is part of what scripture writers are talking about when they describe being able to walk through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil, and that there's actually something deeper here in life that we could be reaching for, aspiring toward, but actually we could experience even in this present existence. And so when Kara and I started talking about this gathering, it was early May. So this is before George Floyd was murdered. This is before Black Lives Matter came back into all of our mentality and on all of our screens and in our minds. So even just if you can go back to beginning of May, and we're talking about resiliency and buoyancy in the midst of uncertainty. And so in that moment, it was all about the COVID-19 pandemic and sheltering in place. And what was happening, just to kind of to name it and to label it, the heavy reality that we experienced was, there was that season where as the pandemic was rising and rising, whenever you got in front of a TV, you would see two scoreboards, right? You'd see one scoreboard that has pandemic deaths and cases, and those were going up. And then you had another scoreboard that was the economy of the United States and the stock market going down and down and down. And it was just this high pressure, low pressure system with tons of anxiety around that. And then we did our sheltering in place, social distancing. And so for some introverts, that just became like a really great excuse to not have to be around people. And there was a silver lining. But for a lot of folks, like extremely extroverted folks like me, it just became kind of mind numbing and isolating and rattling to navigate all of that uncertainty. And then to do it with such a small circle of people around you. And then the end of May, when George Floyd was murdered, that brought back to the forefront of many of our minds issues of racial injustice and inequality, both in the moment, but then as you peel back the layers, you realize there's 401 years of a history here. And so though this conversation here is not necessarily around racial equality and justice and reconciliation, although I would love to have a conversation about that in the future, it still matters for this conversation because simply living in a moment where every time you turn on your news feed, you are seeing a video of an unarmed man being murdered, or hearing a commentary on it, or seeing protests, or seeing marches, and then starting to ask questions about, well, what's my role in this? Do I have a role in this? How do I respond? Especially for people like USD alums that are usually very high functioning people. By definition, we are educated and highly educated people. We're used to being able to identify an issue, isolate the issue, apply resources and critical thinking around it, create some action steps, and then change it. And you just can't do it with something that is of this magnitude and with this much gravity. So we're holding all of that. And then even now we're holding the prospect of reopening our society as we're watching the COVID cases rise. And so I just wanted to name and frame all of that as that's what I mean when I talk about how do you go through uncertainty. That's the uncertainty. So if it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, it's because it is in a way. And oftentimes when we experience this sort of prolonged uncertainty, it can do a couple different things to us. And this goes all the way back to our reptilian brain, the limbic system, where it's fight or flight. It's really fight or flight or freeze, right? And so on one hand, we can get really anxious and every system in your body ramps up while you try to control whatever you can. And you begin to realize you can't actually control all that much. And so it creates anxiety. And so there's this anxious response. If I need to do something, but I can't. Or there's this freeze mentality where it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. Depression sets in, even if it's not clinical depression, at least some of the symptoms of depression where you're finding yourself generally having negative feelings about the future, dismal feelings about the present. You're hitting the snooze button the third and fourth and fifth time, and then finally just throwing the alarm clock across the room. It's just hard to move through it because it's so overwhelming. Therapists talk about those responses as either overfunctioning, getting involved, rolling up your sleeves, I can take care of this, I'm going to do it, or underfunctioning. You step back, you just let the world happen to you, you become passive. And I've definitely gone through all of those different cycles of responses during this season. So I think the big opportunity in a season like this is that as a pastor and as a Christian, as a person of faith, I don't think that God creates pandemics. And I definitely think God cares about every human being on this planet that's created in the image and likeness of God and bears the title of beloved as experiencing a life that is equal and free of fear from violence or exclusion. So I think God cares about all that's going on. I don't think that God has created a pandemic like this. I do think that God is an opportunist and can use a season like this to teach us a lot about ourselves and about our world. And so I think one of the opportunities that we have, Socrates famously said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And a season like this gives us the opportunity, if we take it, to slow down and to take a greater perspective and inventory of our lives. As I don't think that this pandemic has made our lives more fragile. I think it has revealed how fragile our lives actually are. And we spend a lot of time and resources and money and energy on creating lives that have the veneer of being omnicompetent and secure, whether that's through the image that we project to the world, through the career that we seek to advance and secure, through our 401k and retirement plans, through children, if we have children, the way we parent them, all of these things, none of them are bad in and of themselves. In fact, they're all great gifts. But when we make those things our ultimate security, they will ultimately fail us. And I think this pandemic is a moment that will reveal things like that. And so it has me asking questions that I share with you, as you do an inventory of yourself. What has the last few months revealed about where you seek your meaning and where you seek your security? So then when your finances begin to get disturbed, on one hand, anybody who begins to lose money over anything should be a certain amount of not okay with that. That's a given. But when you're ultimately devastated because of it, that's just a blinking light on your dashboard that says, maybe I'm putting more stock, no pun intended, in my bank account than I actually would be healthy for me at this point. Same thing with any number of places that we go for security. I think socially isolating and being socially distanced has certainly put strains on relationships. And so it begins to reveal, asking questions like, how do you fill in the blank? If I just had the right amount of money, then I'd be okay. If I just had the right career, then I'd be okay. If I just had the right family, then I'd be all right. If I had the right children, or different children, or if I had the right spouse or a different spouse, or if I had a boyfriend or girlfriend, or if I was single and I got out of this relationship, we start to think, if I just fill in the blank, then I'll be okay. And those things begin to get stripped away from us, and we're just left with ourselves. And I think that's part of the opportunity that we have right now, to just inventory and say, where have I been getting my meaning? I found these two great quotes. I'll share one of them with you. Maybe I'll share both. Yeah, and I kind of just keep these on my computer to give me a reality check about where do I find my security. So the first one's from Brad Pitt when he was interviewed by Rolling Stone magazine. So I do not need to tell you how wealthy or successful or famous Brad Pitt is. But he's sitting here, and this is what he says. He says, I'm the one who's got everything. I know, but I'm telling you, once you've got everything, then you're just left with yourself. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It doesn't help you sleep any better, and you don't wake up any better because of it. Right? So he's in this moment of like severe achievement and ultimate accomplishment. As the Catholic theologian Richard Rohr said, you can climb the ladder of success your entire life only to realize it's been leaning against the wrong wall the entire time. Or Tom Brady, who was the greatest of all time in some people's minds, quarterback of the New England Patriots. After he won 3 Super Bowl rings, he was dating a supermodel at the time who he has since married. He had $600 million in the bank. And he says in an interview, why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I've reached my goal, my dream, my life. I think, God, it's got to be more than this. So the interview asks him, what's the answer? And Brady says, I wish I knew. Right? And so I think a moment like this, when things are either being stripped away from us or they are being threatened to be stripped away from us, it gives us a chance to have some clarity on where we actually find our meaning and our security. And then there are just the general frustrations of going through a season like this, where I mentioned before, one of our responses is to over control things. The other one is to shut down. And so you see things like, in our faith community alone, I've seen a number of people relapse from addictions that they had a good amount of recovery around. And even folks that wouldn't consider themselves in need of recovery certainly will say they've gone back to their particular forms of comfort in ways that have been unhealthy or unhelpful, whether that would be shopping or alcohol or food or you name it. So we're finding, I guess what I would say there is, we're either going to find healthy coping mechanisms or we're going to find unhealthy coping mechanisms. And the question is, what then would be healthy coping mechanisms for us to find? And so there's this moment, there's this opportunity, and then, that kind of just drops us off on the door of, so where do we go from here? And what do we do? And my first action step, and this is coming from kind of theological study, psychological reading, interviewing a ton of people, and then just my own experience. And the first one would be kind of counterintuitive to a type A person, and it's just stop if you can. Some of us can't stop. You've got to work multiple jobs. You have mouths to feed, and you're saying, look, stopping would be a great luxury right now. I get that. But if you can take 5 minutes a day and breathe and reflect and get centered, I'll come back around to that breathe, reflect, centering aspect. But if you could do that, I think even just physiologically, it begins to restore a lot of your biological systems in your body to equilibrium, so you're not always operating out of adrenaline. As my therapist has said to me many times, the old saying, don't just stand there, do something. He often says to me, don't just do something, stand there. Take some time and reflect.
Matt, we had talked earlier about that concept of operating at such a high level for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And can you share with this group what you had talked to me about?
Yeah. So the meta example of that would be, and I referenced the Catholic theologian Richard Rohr, who had founded and is the head of the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the reason he started that decades ago was because one of his best friends, Jim Wallace, was and still is a very influential social activist based out of Washington, D.C. And Jim Wallace and friends were marching for racial justice back in the 60s. And they were marching and they were activating, and they were really, really busy and getting involved, living passionately out of their vision and values for equality. All good things. But what Father Richard Rohr noticed was these people were imploding or exploding at a high percentage and a high rate. They were burning out. And he realized that there actually has to be this balance between action and contemplation, right? All action with no contemplation means you're going to burn out, or you will have misdirected action. All contemplation with no action doesn't really do much good for anybody, but you do want to have the tension or the balance of both. And so one of the gifts I think we have is to use that time to figure out, and for me, it works to write things down, old school, pen and paper. My whiteboard is just over here with another list of things. But it's, what am I concerned about? What's my hope? What's my vision? What's not happening that I wish would? What am I afraid of that's going to be taken away from me? Or what am I afraid of that I'm not going to get? Which, by the way, that's a great kind of bifurcation of fear. Fear generally occurs when you either think that something you have is going to be taken from you, or something you don't have is not going to be given to you. And that could be health, wealth, relationships, career, anything.
Sure.
So what am I afraid of? And then what in this is mine to own? I think one of the things that particularly my Anglo friends who have not gone on a journey of kind of racial awareness or identity for very long, and they're kind of in the beginning, and I think I'm still toward the beginning. I'm no guru by any stretch, but I think one of the overwhelming aspects of the Black Lives Matter movement for people of privilege is, I don't know where to start. It's so overwhelming. I think I'm just not going to get involved. And I think the answer to that, and the pandemic as well, right? Just, it's too big. And I think if we can take some moments to take inventory, to breathe, to reflect, to journal, and just say, what is mine to own today? Okay. I don't need to know steps 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, but what's step 1? And how do I start there? Right? This brings us back to what's often called the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so I think that becomes helpful, because then our mind or our soul or our consciousness or our conscience, it's not running all the time thinking, I need to be the savior of the world. I mean, for friends coming from a Christian perspective, the good news is you already have a savior, and it's not you. And so we can actually trust that God is at work even in the midst of all of our uncertainty and frailty. So we can I'll hit on a couple more, because I know we're going to get into some question and answer time together. But the next one is community. Do not go this path alone. And I think that's one of the devastating aspects of this pandemic, is that it has made us feel alone.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. And people ask me, when is Renewed Church going to open back up? And I always say, well, the church never closed. Like, the church is always open. We're praying, we're studying scripture, we're growing, we're serving our neighbors, but we're not doing it in person. And that's a huge deal, right? We are communal creatures. I can give you a whole the little theological piece on that is, if it is true that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that means that God has been a community dancing around one another, loving one another, pouring God's self into one another throughout all eternity. And you and I are created in the image and likeness of that God. It means we were created to be connected to other people, which is why it's so devastating in a prison. When a prisoner, what's the worst punishment you can give them? Put them in solitary confinement, right? Because it kills your soul. So I think right now, in this time of uncertainty, it's critical that we don't go to solitary confinement, but we have to work extra hard to be authentically and intimately connected with each other. So just 1,000 friends on Facebook, is not going to do it. And just a superficial Zoom meeting or FaceTime every now and then, that's not going to do it either. We need to seek out a relationship where at least one other person on the planet knows you and knows what you're going through. Now, I know this is difficult because I do believe at the core of every human being's belief system is, I want to be known and I want to be loved. And simultaneously, the really difficult part to that is, most of us have an inner critic that tells us if someone else knew everything about you, they would laugh or they would run. And so this is why Brene Brown's stuff on vulnerability goes so viral, because we're all yearning to have actual, vulnerable, real, connected relationships with others. I was reflecting on this the other day. My family took a short vacation to Sequoia National Park, and it was breathtaking. We just came back last night, breathtaking. And I've always had the image of a tree. The tree goes as high as the root system goes down deep. And in fact, one of my prayers as my leadership has developed over the years has been, God, please help my roots to go down as deep as the tree goes high. And the other day, we're standing in front of the largest tree on planet Earth. It's called the General Sherman tree. And what I learned there is this giant sequoia that's 2,200 years old and towers over 300 feet high actually has a root system that doesn't go all that deep. It kind of breaks the paradigm. But the only way that it can grow tall and long and sturdy without going too deep is its root system goes out very, very wide. And then it actually intermingles and connects with the roots of the trees around it. So even though it hasn't gone all that deep over the years, it is so connected to the trees around it that an earthquake or a gale force wind cannot touch it.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I think that's a picture of where we want to be today. Of course, you want to be a person of depth. That's why I started with reflection, meditation. But you also want to be a person who's connected with others. And if you don't know where to start with that, sometimes people go, well, Matt, that's great for you. You're a very outgoing person. It's really hard for me to make friends. It takes one trusted person. And if I could be a friend or a pastor in your life, or just a USD alum that can help you on that direction, I am here. I would love to help that, because nobody should have to go through a season alone. I just have a couple more here. The faith piece is obviously critical. And I don't know everybody's story who's on this webinar. So I will assume that we're all coming from different places in our spiritual journey. And I think that's great. I can speak as a Christian and as a pastor, and I'm going through, just before we started, I was like, I just want to take a look at a couple other stories in scripture. And I'm not going to be the preacher who's going to make you listen to a sermon, not on Sunday morning. But I will say, as I went through some of the earlier stories, there's this one part of the Bible called Ecclesiastes, where there's one of the kings of ancient Israel is talking about how meaningless life is. And maybe you have had the experience where you've gone, look, I've made a ton of friends and it still feels meaningless. I've gotten a bunch of promotions, still meaningless. I've climbed the mountain of success only to realize there are other mountains in life to climb, and it feels meaningless. And that's kind of where this person's coming from. This is a person of great wealth, great esteem. They kind of have everything. And he's saying at the end, it can all just kind of blow away in a moment. The only thing that has that deep rootedness, he concludes at the end, is get connected to the God that created you, because that's the only one that will never leave you or forsake you.
I don't think Tom Brady read that passage.
I guess he didn't read that. But Tom Brady is the king.
Right.
This is Ecclesiastes in 2020.
Yes.
So it's like it's both encouraging and a little despondence inducing to realize not much has changed in 2,000 years, 2,500 years in that case. But I would just say too, coming from USD, where at least at one point or another we noticed that we walked by a beautiful chapel with a cross in it. That's one of the great clues I think that we have. One of the great doorways that we have, if we're asking questions like, where is God in the midst of something like this? And there's a theologian named Leslie Newbegin who said, the cross does not explain suffering, but it does tell us something about our suffering. It tells us that God sees all of our questions, sees all of our tears, sees all of our pain, and he is intimately connected to it, to the point where he would bear it himself. In other words, God is, and maybe this circles back to the meditation. What are we meditating on? For me, meditating on a God who shares in my suffering, a God who knows what it's like to feel alone, a God who knows what it's like to feel pain, a God who knows what it's like, paradoxically, the night before he's crucified, to look down that long road toward the cross and say, if there's any other way to do this, let's find it. And to hear the voice of the Father say, this is the way that I've created, walk in it. And he does. And so the cross becomes both the great clue that God joins in our suffering, but it doesn't end there, right? If the story ended there, then it would be, well, gosh, isn't that just too bad? We have this great compassionate God who suffers with us, but can't do anything about it. And instead, you have the story continue where 3 days later, in the empty tomb, there's actually a resurrection that tells us that the final word on all of this is that every tear is wiped from every eye, every injustice is done away with, and death itself is no more. Now, I realize that can devolve into a simple hallmark platitude used to tie a really neat bow around the messiness of life. But it can also become dynamite that can detonate a revolution in our own lives and in this world. I mean, that's kind of what the great leaders who have gone before us would say. Martin Luther King, why Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., can you continue to march and speak and walk courageously? He would say, well, I believe that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I believe that history is actually going somewhere. And so, those are kind of some ways that, I guess the way that I would kind of sum all of that up, and forgive me, but this actually is our methodology at Renew Church as well, is like to reconnect with God, to reunite with God, to reconnect with one another, and then be redirected outward to serve our neighbors. And I think that's kind of what it looks like to be truly alive. I don't think those dynamics actually change, reuniting, reconnecting, redirecting. I think in a season like the pandemic and racial equality and justice moment, it gives us just a more hyper tense and dense and intense moment to actually live those things out.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the concept of that pairs really nicely, and the timing of you being able to see that big, beautiful tree, with the roots that are intertwined with that of that lives around it, pairs really nicely with the concept of looking outward and supporting our communities as they support us too.
Yeah.
That Matt, so this is me turning into a little bit of an interview now with you. I hope you don't mind, because I have so many questions. Can you talk about your community, and how your community has supported you, and how in turn you've worked to support your community during this time of not being able to be together?
Yeah. Well, on one hand, it's been beautiful. On the other hand, it's been really, really difficult. So they do not teach you in seminary how to pastor a church through a global pandemic. So I'm kind of learning as I go. The secret is I don't know what I'm doing, but the good news is I know that I don't know what I'm doing. So at least I have that going for me. When it all happened so fast, where we moved from everybody can come together in the beginning of March to nobody can come together, just like that. And so overnight, we were thrust into this new realm just along with everybody else. And the way that I look at it is, our DNA as a church did not change in that moment. So this is a church that, just to give a little context, I was born and raised in San Diego, moved to San Francisco, lived there for 13 years, pastored a church in the Mission District of San Francisco, and over time had San Diego friends come and visit us and say, hey, I don't normally go to church, but if this church was in San Diego, I'd be a part of it. And then another group would come and say, look, I don't normally go to church. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. But I love seeing a church that not only talks about the renewal of your city, but actually works and pours yourself out sacrificially to make it happen. If that church was in San Diego, I'd be a part of it. And so I thought, look, I'm going to start a church in San Diego for all of my thoughtful, skeptical, spiritual, but not religious friends to come and have a home and grow in connection with God and with their community. So along with that comes some DNA, including we're a church that exists not just for the good of ourselves, but for the good of all our neighbors. We're a church that tries to always remember what it's like not to believe these things. So I don't assume that everybody who's there is on the same page, because we're not. Life is messy. And so that just normalizes the conversation for questions, for doubts, for life and growth to be 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. So that's all baked into the recipe for Renew Church. With the pandemic happening, that all had to get moved online very rapidly. So it was, we still have our worship services on Facebook Live at 9:30 in the morning. So we're doing that virtually. We have our Bible study community group on Zoom meetings. But then I'm trying to find ways not only to connect with everybody in the community one-on-one, I'm trying to do what I mentioned with the Sequoia trees, right? To help them all to connect with one another, so that this is not a church where everyone's just connected to the pastor, but this is more of a web of relationships that can be much stronger. So an example of what that's looked like in terms of serving our neighbors. I mean, a significant amount of our resources goes to serving our neighbors locally in North Park, and then spanning out from there to San Diego, Tijuana, and then around the world. So we would normally, before the pandemic, we'd have a huge party on 30th Street at the church. Once a month, we'd invite all of our friends without homes and all our friends with homes. And the church would donate all the food. We'd have a big barbecue grill going, live music from local musicians. And it's a celebration of community among people who normally walk past each other and talk past each other, but now they're actually coming together and forming relationships, and the experience of the community is becoming more rich. So as soon as global pandemic happened, that mode had to change,
Of course.
but the mission never changed.
Yeah.
And so instead, the church was mobilized to make grab and go lunch bags in our kitchens and get our neighbors all involved. And then we could distribute them safely with social distancing still on the first Saturday of the month. Now, granted, I'd much rather have a 5-piece band playing while I'm flipping burgers on the grill, but we wanted to make
Wouldn't
sure
we all?
that right, everyone's invited. Yeah, as soon as we're all back together, everyone's invited. But that's an example of trying to have a little bit of ingenuity and creativity while we still live out the mission that we're called to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think everyone is looking for those opportunities, and hence this session today, and an opportunity to get together in a meaningful way, hear from a fellow alumnus who's doing something meaningful in our San Diego community too. So without further ado, I'd really like to hear from our participants and to have our launch into our Q&A session, if you will. So if everyone wouldn't mind activating their cameras, letting Pastor Matt see you. I want to see some faces. I think I saw my dear friend Heather Dooley in the room as well. So excited to see you, Heather, and hopefully we'll see there she is. And there's Leah. Great. Yeah, thank you. We've got Maya here. Maya is with our Alumni Association staff.
Awesome. Oh, nice background.
Oh yeah, that looks nice. We all want to be on that beach.
That's right.
We've got Maya Mancuso. She's the president of our Bay Area Club. Hi, Maya.
Hi.
Hey, Maya. I went to a few events in the Bay Area whenever USD played USF, and we'd go to over to the Pig and Whistle there and have a little time together.
Oh, the Pig and Whistle, bringing it back.
Oh yeah.
Well, so this is a time to ask some questions of Matt and have a dialogue with one another. This is a great opportunity to talk to each other and hear from Matt as well. So, Maya, I think that you might have had a question for Matt to kick us off. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I do. And thank you again, Pastor Matt, for taking the time out of your day just to share your wealth and wisdom and knowledge with us all. I think it's a great opportunity to really connect and just come together. So you touched a little bit on the topic of building resiliency. So, my question for you is, how can we use our connections with God and one another to center ourselves and really be more resilient?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll just kind of give you my working image. I don't know if it's a definition, but it's an image of resiliency. So when I think resiliency is the ability for a plant in the forest to undergo a high wind, and it can bend with the wind, but it doesn't break, right? Or, I go swimming in La Jolla Cove 3 times a week, and out there is a half-mile buoy, and that buoy moves with the waves, but it never comes untethered. So resilient doesn't mean you're not going to move, but it means you're not going to come untethered and you're not going to break. And that there's an old teaching that Jesus gives at one point, and he talks about asking, what is the foundation of your life? Now, here's the thing. Everybody has a foundation to our life, whether you know it or not. The question is, do you know it, and what is it? And he says, the person who hears my words and puts them into practice, so not just hear them, but actually do them, is like someone who builds their house on a rock. And when the winds come and the waves come, the house will still be standing because the rock is not going to move. So the question is the thing that you're building your life on as sturdy as that rock? Because if it's not, it doesn't say if the wind comes or the waves come, when the wind comes and the waves come. In San Francisco, I pastored a generally upwardly mobile, wealthy, young congregation. We had like directors and executives from Google and Apple and all that. And so I'd tell people, look, you have either experienced, you fall into one of two categories. You've either experienced suffering in your life or you will. I guess the third category is you happen to die young before you experience anything. But really, if you live long enough, this life is going to put you through something. And right now we're experiencing that as a society. So I think it's really the confluence of those three strands. If you can kind of think of that as three like beautiful fibers that can make a braid, but the strands are staying connected to myself by taking care of myself in healthy ways. I mentioned the swimming 3 times a week or the hiking in Sequoia National Park. Those, on one hand, I realize those are great luxuries. They're also directly connected to my mental and emotional health. I know that. When I don't swim, it is harder for me to get out of bed for the rest of the week. And when I do swim, I just feel better in my own skin. So, which makes sense, right? Because our bodies and our souls are integrated together with our minds and our psyche. So the first strand is taking care of yourself, which includes that reflection. The second one is never be alone, meaning, of course, you'll have moments of being alone. Do not go through life alone. And I've seen this more and more recently. I'll come back and touch on that. So take care of yourself, have a meaningful connection with others, and a meaningful connection with God. And friends from other faith backgrounds, again, I'm coming from a Christian perspective. I would love to hear what that looks like in your life as well. To go back to that lonely part, I'll just tell you something that has been so sobering to me. One of the other things that's helped me take care of myself is I ride my bike a lot, like 30 miles, 40 miles a day, 3 days a week. And one of my favorite routes goes from North Park around San Diego Harbor to Coronado. And about a month into the pandemic, I did that ride, I think, 2 times in 1 week. And both times, traffic on the Coronado Bridge was stopped with all the emergency responder vehicles out there. And you know why they're stopped. Because someone had or was thinking about taking their life. And that's just a stark reminder of the pressure that is put on us here. And usually, oftentimes, part of what adds to the despair is feeling like we're alone. So I've just joined this thing on Facebook. It's the 25 and 25 challenge. And it's basically, it's around, this happens to be around men's mental health. But the whole message is, look, we so often keep our thoughts and our feelings and emotions to ourselves. And then we finally just explode or implode. We need to find really healthy ways to connect with each other. So I think all three of those aspects, self-care, communal connection, and some sort of a deep faith connection. And you don't have to start as a deep faith connector, right? You can start like a small child. That's the metaphor that we're constantly given. You don't have to have a master's degree. You don't have to have every word in the Bible memorized. You can start with a simple trust that the creator of the world actually knows you and loves you, and go from there. But those have been, instrumental in my own resiliency. Oh, and you know the other thing, I forgot to mention this, Maya, because this is not part of my personality naturally. Learning to lament. Just learning to say this is not the way it's supposed to be, and even shed some tears over it and let that go. I think that's a good thing. So I have much more of an upbeat kind of sunny side up personality. I need to train myself to say it's not all silver lining, and we can actually face that instead of minimizing it.
Matt, that kind of leads me to my question. Hi, friend. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you.
Good. To piggyback on that, how with friends and family, excuse me, that who are really having a hard time with this, not that we're not all having a hard time with it, but some people are having an even more challenging time with it.
Yeah.
And just negativity and anger comes out at you, and it's not really anger at you, but there's underlying meaning or underlying issues going on and struggles. How are you supporting those friends and family that are lashing out like that, or that obviously need love and support, but are keeping you at that distance?
Yeah. I'm trying to make it really specific. I'm thinking of particular relationships in my life right now where this is actively happening, not a resolved thing from last month, but like right now. And one general principle, and they talk about this for therapists and pastors and first responders and psychologists and others, is like the concept of vicarious trauma. So by choosing to enter into the pain of another, we actually take some of it on. The other side of that is the Irish have a great saying, a burden shared is a burden halved. But if you're the person who they're sharing it with, the reason it is halved for them is because you took half of it with you and went home with it. Mm-hmm. So on one hand, I think it's just helpful to have a very honest view of that it is not a neutral thing to move toward the pain points of others. As a Christian, the way that my resource for that and my fuel for that is to say, look how God moves toward me, therefore I will go and move toward others. And look how God pours out God's self for me, therefore I'll pour myself out for others. But just know that as you are being broken and poured out for others, you actually are being affected by it. It's not neutral. So developing good self-care, like I mentioned before, is critical. And it will not come from that person that you are giving so much to. If it could come from them, you wouldn't need to be helping them so much.
Right.
So finding other ways, finding a good friend that you could vent to and just share it all. Say, look, I mean, so often I'll say to Florence, on one hand, as a pastor, everything I say in pastoral counseling conversations, that always stays between me and them. But I'll also, I'll also have venting sessions with Florence where I'll say, look, I'm not saying my thoughts are right now, but here's how frustrated I am because of this, and this. And it's just helpful to get it out so I don't keep it all trapped in here.
Absolutely.
I think that's one. And that just goes to kind of the conventional wisdom of like, and forgive this for being so cliche, but when you watch the safety video on the airplane, they're like, if those little masks come down, take care of yourself and then take care of the people around you. Because otherwise you won't have anything to give. Mm-hmm. And then the third piece, and I'm sure that you probably could predict this, but it is healthy boundaries and realizing you can't help someone that doesn't want to be helped. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And so it's too bad. But if you are continually trying to help somebody and all you're getting back is venom and teeth and nails, sometimes it comes just out of self-preservation and respect. It comes down to, look, I really care about you. I really love you. I want to be here for you. I can't do it this way. I will be here for you when you're ready. And that is so hard.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Does anyone
Shout
else
out to Jason Quito, who's on mute right now. I've known him since grade school at Sacred Heart Academy, Ocean Beach.
It's awesome. Jason, where are you heading?
Heading to my mother-in-law's house. My sister-in-law's moving out of state. Tomorrow morning they take off, so we're going to share a little socially distant dinner with them this evening before they take off.
That's great. How have you been?
Matt, good to see Heather. Good. I'm a high school teacher now and campus minister up in Burbank at Providence High School. But grew up in San Diego, went to grade school, high school, and USD with Matt. And but yeah, it's just kind of the same thing, trying to support a community when no one can be together, and finding a way to do that. Also, we just became part of the minivan crowd with the kiddos back here, so also supporting them, and my oldest was in kindergarten this past year, so trying to do the supporting him and giving them a sense of normalcy, helping them kind of process what's going on in the world. And when we said we were going over to dinner, they're like, we can't do that. Well, okay, we're gonna here's what we're gonna do, here's the process we're gonna take here, here's what we're gonna do to make sure we keep ourselves and our family safe, that kind of thing. So yeah, just trying to manage all of those things. It's been a fun challenge at some points, and really, really challenging and difficult and frustrating, and to manage that and balance the self-care while you're trying to care for your family and for other people. And I've been successful at points and less so at others, and but just trying to continue doing that.
Yeah. Don't think you're unique in that. I think all of us have experienced some successes throughout these last few months, and certainly some learning opportunities have been posed to each of us. So glad you're doing well. Does anyone else have any questions, Pastor Matt?
I have a question actually really related to what you just said, Jason, and that's around balancing self-care and caring for others. And personally, I know I have many things I should be grateful for during this time, and I am grateful for. And I've kept my job. I'm working remotely. I'm healthy. I live in the same state as some of my family, so I'm doing a lot better than a lot of people. So I feel like I've really taken that and just put that into helping everyone else and helping other members of my family that aren't doing so well, or friends that aren't doing so well, and not caring for myself. And I know I need to do more, but how do you actually do it? Like, how do you balance that when you feel like you have this obligation and you think maybe it will actually make you feel better to help others?
Yeah. So, okay, one thing I realized maybe you'd want to see a couple of resources, and this is just an example, but this comes under the category, Maya, of like that reflection piece of saying what is mine to do and what's not mine to do, and what is driving me in this moment right now. So some of us might see a need of somebody, and we are going to give and help and serve out of a place of like, I'm secure, I'm thankful, I'm grateful, I've got a good job, I'm healthy, I have plenty to give, so I'm going to do it. Another person might take the exact same action of care, but they're driven by a completely different motive. And the motive could be a tape that runs in their mind that goes something like, I need to be needed. I need to help them so that I know that I'm actually somebody. You're actually getting something out of the serving, but it's not all that healthy for you. And that second motive being one of the big problems with it is it's never satisfied. It's just never enough. And so we end up completely depleted. So I think even just in the reflection time, asking like for you, I know there are specific names and faces of people that you're caring for, but what do they need? What of it is mine to give? And what is motivating me right now? And am I coming from a healthy, life-giving, sustainable place or not? Because friends, I hate to be the naysayer here, but I think we're going to be going through this for a long time. So that's me kind of coming back with you, Maya, and coming in a conversation now. So do you want to refine and ask kind of further?
No, I think that's an interesting way to think about it. And that second point of needing to be needed is probably a lot of what all of us are going through, who feel like we're in good positions and should be doing more because we have gratitude for that.
Yeah.
It's actually just writing things down and taking the mental space to figure out how it all fits together.
Yeah, I'm not a writer by nature. I'm much more of a talker. My wife and kids will attest to that 100%. So I found a career where I could talk for a living. but the writing part helps, because otherwise I'm out doing something and I remember, oh, I need to do this, but I neither do it to get it off the to-do list nor write it down, so it just sits there and it just keeps swirling and swirling and swirling. So at least if I put something down on the list with check marks, or if one of the things that have helped me is I write out my prayers and I don't edit them. I don't show them to anybody else, they're mine, but it just helps me to get it on paper. There's something kinetically that helps me to join when I'm doing it physically.
Thank you. This was a really good reflection today. Thank you.
Oh man, my pleasure. Thank you, Maya.
I wanted to just say hi to Matt and Jason especially.
Hello.
It's been a very long time, but I'm here, Matt, because I was like, I haven't seen Matt in 20 years now.
It's so good. I hope you're not disappointed.
No, not at all. But I wanted to share, though it's not necessarily a question, when I find that oftentimes I'm not very good at listening to God the first time, so he tells me things over and over in a very short time span. And Sunday's homily, our priest talked about how our anxiety grows when our fear of the Lord diminishes, because we've just set our sights on something that it shouldn't be on. And so when we're focused on those material things, and when our comfort is in there, that's when that anxiety grows. So it's helpful to me to hear that again, from another perspective, just to kind of take ownership on how I'm feeling about things. And the other part, one more statement and then a question. Today's gospel readings were about the house founded on sand. So timely in there too. But I think one of the things that I've really discovered, that it's hard for me, we're used to all those individual itty bitty conversations where somebody says, how are you doing? And you can say just briefly, things are great or they're not. And maybe you get something off your chest and then you move on. And in these times where we're not really seeing people, when I do connect, it feels like I'm burdening them, because here's all of the stuff that's going on because I haven't necessarily seen somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm having a hard time too. I've realized maybe what Maya was talking about, in that I know that there are some things that are happening to friends of mine that I just feel like I don't have the carrying capacity to take on. And so I think part of it is building connect, like they're two different things, but they're related in the fact that I can't take on more, I think, because I'm not connecting or being able to get rid of things as we progress through. And I didn't know if you had thoughts on building more resiliency in those ways. Does that make sense?
If I'm understanding you correctly, Leah, it's not only a question of resiliency in that one, but it's a question of capacity.
Yeah.
Right? What's your bandwidth? How much can you do? Right. So, and bandwidth fluctuates, and it really changes based on our context. Right. So like I'm seeing right now, and I never would have guessed this about the pandemic, but like, not only am I seeing our homeless friends really having a hard time and single mothers having a really hard time, I'm seeing like super educated, upwardly mobile professionals having a hard time, because I'm thinking of one particular person working at a startup with a wife with 2 kids, and they're expected to be working on really high level stuff all the time, but they're working from home and the kids at the door and they need help. And this person is feeling like my career is slipping through my fingers. While there are other people on that person's team, 28 years old, no children, in their condo, just crushing it right now because they have no one, they have none of the resistance, right? And so this pandemic has put weight and stress on us in ways that we couldn't have predicted or seen beforehand. In terms of resiliency and capacity, I think two things have helped me, and this is just to extend, maybe to double click on the idea of what's yours to own and what's not yours to own. One is a question for each person that you're caring for. How can I be helpful for you in this time? Because they might say something that you didn't think of, and you might be thinking you can't give them something that they didn't even want to ask for in the first place. So at least that clarifies it. And what I find a lot of the times is that when people go through pain and suffering, they actually don't need answers. They just need company. And so even the act of bearing witness to that person's pain or their experience, just bearing witness to them, goes back to never do this alone, right? So you're helping them never do this alone. And I think that has far more weight and value than we give it credit for. So even that it's definitely not nothing. I think it's a whole lot. I'm thinking of someone particularly in our church right now who, really interestingly, I've never met in person. This person found us on Facebook Live because a friend sent them a link and said, I think you'd like these people. So I've never met this person in person. They've come into the church. They've had this really great experience in the community and faith awakening. And now they're in the hospital and just lost their housing and just lost their job in the same month. And it's, what can I do, right? So this goes back to the good news is I'm not the savior, right? There is a savior. I'm not the one. But all I've been able to do so far, I can't even visit this person in the hospital because of COVID-19. I can just bear witness and be there and make sure this person doesn't have to go alone.
Thank you, Matt. I think we might have time for, it's 5 o'clock already, but maybe just one more question for those of you willing to stay on a little bit longer.
Thanks for everyone staying to the end of the party.
Matt, can you repeat what you said? You said reunite with God, reconnect with others, and redirect.
Yeah, be redirected outward to serve our neighbors. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that part is not only comes from where I think human thriving comes from. We were created not just for ourselves, we were created to pour ourselves out for others and to realize that we're all connected like those sequoia trees. But also that's part of the vision of the church, right? That we would never be a church that devolves into something that just exists to build a building for ourselves or to make ourselves more comfortable. I mean, that's when a church does that, it becomes a social club, usually of people that just look one way, think one way, and make a certain amount of money. And there's this kind of homogeneity to it. But rather, we want to be ethnically diverse, socioeconomically diverse, people of all different backgrounds and orientations coming together to then go outward and serve all of our neighbors, which that's not a new idea, as you know. Like that's Jesus coming into a town and saying, I forgive you, I love you, I'm living water. If you're thirsty, come and drink. I'm the bread of life. If you're hungry, come and eat. And then he wouldn't stop there. He would always send them out 2 by 2 into all the towns around them. And he'd say, go and do likewise, right? In the church, we would say that's extending the peaceful kingdom of God wherever we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for spending the time today. Matt, friend, it is always a pleasure to spend some time with you. Thank you for giving your time to your USD community today. We have recorded this, so we'll have it available for our wider USD audience to be able to share in your wisdom that you've shared. And I do have a screen that's pretty text heavy, so for those of you who are able to see it, Matt's email address is there if you'd like to connect with him. We do have a couple events coming up that I curated what I thought you might be interested in. So on July 8th, we have a session that's being co-hosted by our New York Torero Club. It's Staying Healthy at Home. July 11th is our annual USD Wine Classic. This year it's a virtual toast coast to coast, raising money for incredibly needed current youth scholarships for our underrepresented student communities. On July 21st, we have a Welcome to Minneapolis for anyone who is interested in learning more about our Minneapolis club or moving to Minneapolis. It's actually a very interesting time, as you might know, for our Minneapolis Toreros. So I encourage you to check that out. And then finally, on July 22nd, we have a session with Father Robert Capone, class of 1991, who is a chaplain on University of San Diego's campus, on the topic of balancing gratitude and grief. So those are just some of our upcoming virtual events. We also have quite a few virtual offerings, our Tiny Torero Storytime podcast for all of our little toreros, which is very cute. Our team mentoring platform, if you're interested in mentoring our current USD students, that's a great way to get in there and do some flash mentoring opportunities, have some conversations with our students, alumni Zoom trips, and our chats with Charles. Those are both interview series with alumni as well. So all available on our website at alumni.sandiego.edu. So again, thank you all for joining us today. I will send an email out with some of this information so that way you have it at the ready. And if you have any feedback, please reply to that email directly. Thank you all again, and thank you so much, Matt.
My pleasure. Goodbye, friends. Great seeing you.
Take care, everyone.